live in five, four, three.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us to our LinkedIn Live discussion. My name is Janine Yancey. I head up Emtrain, a culture tech company. And with us today, joining me today, is Claire Schmidt, the founder and CEO of a company called AllVoices. Claire, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, totally. Excited to have you join us. We're going to be talking about strategies to build a culture of trust and have employees share their concerns with management. So management could be proactive and start to really have a nice feedback loop in addressing the concerns. And I think before we start this discussion, I think, Claire, I'd love for you to share a little bit about what prompted you, triggered you to start AllVoices.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I was working as a vice president of technology and innovation at 20th Century Fox. This was back in 2017, and actually read Susan Fowler's blog post about her experience at Uber. And immediately I could see, just from what she described experiencing, that there's sort of this broken process that we are asking employees every day to engage in, which is, if you experience something challenging in the workplace, just go tell someone about it. Tell someone in HR, tell your manager. And what I realized is that many people actually don't speak up. And the reason that they don't is because of what ended up happening with Susan. So people speak up and they experience retaliation. In fact, 75% of people who spoke up about harassment in the workplace reported experiencing retaliation. So I saw that there was an opportunity to basically design a solution that could help make that experience better for employees and safer for employees, and also provide companies with more information. Because what ends up happening when people are afraid is that they don't speak up and they don't share their perspectives, opinions, concerns, feedback. So I saw an opportunity to basically help protect employees and at the same time give companies the opportunity to address issues head on.
That's super. Thanks, Claire. So just to clarify for everyone, AllVoices is a tool that companies can integrate into their operating system, basically, or their environment, to allow employees to safely, anonymously share their concerns, so that you can start to, create this bit of a feedback loop. Is that
Exactly
kind of a fair description, Claire?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit, if you'll humor me a little bit, about the dynamics that you see within companies that creates this need, for employees to have a channel to speak up. So just, companies having blind spots. Let's not assume a Harvey Weinstein situation. Let's assume good intent, good people with good intent, good intentions. But even so, I think there's some company dynamics that produce blind spots. And can you talk to us a little bit about that, Claire?
Yeah, the main issue that I've seen is that companies have a lot going on. They have a lot of different priorities. They're trying to make money. They're, focusing on marketing and sales and product. And this is true of companies in all industries, right? Not just tech, not just Uber. And there's so much happening in the business that oftentimes companies kind of forget about their people. And I think what's really interesting is that, what ends up happening is that problems kind of brew and simmer and start out really small and then grow and grow and grow until they turn into, potentially a really toxic situation, toxic culture, big issues like harassment. Those can happen over time if smaller culture issues aren't dealt with head on. And so what ends up happening is that companies end up in sort of crisis management mode. And that's what I've seen over and over. I think that's what we saw during the Me Too movement, is all these sort of long brewing issues came to a head in a very public way.
And how do you see the HR function or the people function addressing this need and interacting on some of the blind spots of the people issues?
Yeah, I think, HR's job is in part to help employees, but in part, they're there to sort of serve an administrative function, right? To make sure that the company is compliant, to make sure that, payroll is getting run. And so sometimes these more interpersonal issues don't make their way to HR. And I think a big part of that is due to how, and in which ways HR is being empowered by even more senior leadership like the CEO.
Right.
So when the CEO, is meeting regularly with HR and, getting input from HR and what's happening in the organization in terms of their companies, I think those companies are more likely to have a healthier culture. And so it really totally depends on the company and the HR sort of role and how empowered they are, and then how much they're listened to by CEO, COO, and even the board.
Thanks, Claire. And let me tease that out a little bit, because I certainly have my own perspective on that. I mean, I've been working with and for HR teams for a long time now, and I'd almost say that it's an organizational function that's a little bit in flux right now, in evolving, but it really varies widely. I mean, there are some HR leaders and HR functions where the HR leader is reporting straight to the CEO. That HR leader has a seat at the executive table and is really helping guide the business. And in those situations, the HR function is very strategic, obviously. But then there's other situations, other organizations where, as you were saying, Claire, that HR leader and that team is more administrative in nature, and maybe they're 2 rungs down from the CEO. And that has some pretty big implications for their ability to be proactive, their ability to solve problems, because they're clearly, not as empowered as the HR teams that are reporting straight to the CEO, and that makes sense. And so, what I see is those organizations where the HR team is not as empowered, not as strategic, well, they have less of a kind of ability to make the tough calls and to really enforce cultural norms, cultural health. Which it's, to me, it's interesting, and I think it's interesting that it's a function that is evolving, probably in part as a reaction to the Me Too movement. And I also want to kind of outline tease out another point, which is Emtrain has created, and I think we're just publishing it today, hopefully, our 2020 culture report. And in this report, over a period of about 4 months, I believe it was, we aggregated 2.5 million employee sentiment responses. So this was from 40,000 employees, 2.5 million sentiment responses from 125 different organizations. And what that report showed us is that only 18% of people will actually report harassment. So, that's really interesting. That's the average. So, obviously the healthy organizations, you'll have a bit of a higher percentage than the 18%, but you'll also have a lower percentage than the 18%. And that's, I think, an alarming statistic to think that, take any organization, and about 18% of that workforce is going to feel comfortable enough to report, something like harassment, which means that the top management doesn't have any, ability to be proactive.
Yeah.
So, I guess I want to turn it back to you, Claire, and have you kind of walk us through, what you see as the dynamics and the benefits of having, a nice channel to have employees share their concerns.
Yeah, I mean, I think that statistic is very sobering, because that means that leadership is really only hearing about a fraction of what's happening at their company. HR leadership, definitely executive level leadership. And it's, Emtrain's culture report, I think, goes into a little more depth into some of the statistics that we heard when we were researching this initially, which were from the EEOC, that echo exactly what you found here. 75 to 85% of people said that they would not report harassment to HR. So If that's not happening, if there's not free information flow between employees and HR, even about really serious issues like harassment, which are a legal liability, then there needs to be an alternative channel that where employees basically aren't so fearful about sharing their perspectives, feedback, and serious issues like harassment. And in our product, we actually ask employees, why did you want to use AllVoices to report this issue, as opposed to, telling someone in person? Mm-hmm. We hear a variety of answers. A lot of people fear retaliation. Some of them actually say they didn't know if it was a big enough deal to tell anyone. So back to the Emtrain statistic, only 18% are reporting harassment to HR. There's a variety of reasons as to why that might be. And so I think regardless of what those reasons are, it's important to have a third-party external channel that employees trust and feel is secure, and know that they can be anonymous if need be, in order to encourage more information sharing. And ultimately, companies can take action given the much broader set of information that they'll be getting.
That's super interesting, and I love hearing about some of the information you're getting, Claire, from the users of your tool as to why they felt more comfortable kind of using that channel than going to HR. I know in our experience and working with employees, it's really interesting. Some HR teams will feel very comfortable because we have also a communication channel where employees can ask us general questions. And some HR teams are totally comfortable and fine with that. I mean, it's really somewhat similar to having a live trainer go and do a workshop and answer questions from that workshop, after the fact. But then some HR teams are, really kind of nervous about having a third party actually have any communication with their employees, and the need, it seems like the need from those HR functions to kind of control the conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're seeing from your experiences and what we're seeing here at Emtrain is just that you could want to control the conversation as much as you want, as possible. But the fact of the matter is that, and I think, this makes sense. We all know this. There's no upside for people to start that conversation, right? Like, somebody who sees something and goes to HR to talk about it, there's more, there's often more of a downside than an upside, because all of a sudden now you're involved in an investigation and potentially you're going to be ostracized and retaliated against and so on and so forth. And as we kind of mentioned earlier, you're really also kind of vulnerable to how powerful is that HR organization. And that's going to vary from organization to organization. Some HR teams have power and some don't. Some are there just to dot the I's, cross the T's, and not really solve problems. So I think it's an interesting kind of issue that's going on right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I agree with your perspective on that. I mean, we're putting a lot of pressure on employees when we say the only way to resolve these issues is to go talk to someone in person. Because once that employee comes forward, they can't go back, right? There's no, once you're out, you're kind of out in terms of you've come forward, you've spoken up. And I think we even saw this with bystanders. So people who weren't, the main figure in any type of issue. But one example of this that happened over the summer of 2017 was that an employee at SoFi witnessed sexual harassment, spoke up about it, and he was fired as a bystander. So it's just really, really interesting seeing how much tools like this can actually empower employees to speak up and tell leadership about things in real time, as opposed to seeing an example like what happened at SoFi and being like, I'm going to completely stay out of this. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And it totally depends on the health of the organization, the culture of the organization. Like you said, Janine, how empowered HR is. What we're seeing is actually that companies that we work with tend to have pretty empowered HR teams. Their leadership trusts them to go out and get a tool like this that will make employees feel safe, and wants to actually see what's coming out of it. And so I think, some companies have a little bit less of a proactive culture. They're much more reactive and defensive and essentially trying to cover things up, or put their head in the sand. So I kind of feel like it really, the role of HR can vary drastically in an organization, and what they're willing to do to make employees feel comfortable can also range.
So that makes total sense to me, Claire. And I think what would be helpful is if you can maybe give us a couple of tidbits on situations that you've experienced with some of your clients where your tool allowed that HR team to be proactive, to go from kind of the HR cop to the HR hero, if you will, because I think that the more HR stakeholders hear about this, the more inspired and confident they'll feel to maybe go outside their comfort zone. So can you give us a couple examples where like just total success stories?
Yeah, totally. One example of a great customer that we have that is going really above and beyond on culture is The Wing. Okay. It's a women-run women's co-working space that's very much in high growth mode. They just raised, I think, over $100 million recently, growing rapidly, opening new locations. And they actually just wrote an article about this in Fast Company, about the challenges of sort of scaling your culture and doing so in a really healthy way while you're in such hyper growth mode. And I think, when you have that much capital to deploy and so much is expected of you, it often makes you think, okay, well, I need to focus on priority A, priority B, priority C, and hopefully the culture will just like work itself out. And I think, the sad thing is that when you are growing that fast, culture becomes even more challenging, right? You're hiring people quickly. You're not necessarily dedicating enough time and energy to training or onboarding or all those types of things. So I think The Wing was seeing several challenges around culture, diversity, and inclusion. They wrote about all this, but what was really great was that they had implemented AllVoices, so that their team could anonymously share concerns in a really productive and safe way. The way the product works is that employees can submit feedback, and then leadership can actually view that feedback and respond directly to the person who submitted it initially. So it's not one direction. So they're able to have some of those conversations directly with people who were experiencing challenges, and then ultimately using the product to make big strategic decisions about how they want their culture to look moving forward, and how much time they need to dedicate to making that vision a reality. So I think their dedication to transparency and honesty and feedback has been really exciting to watch. Another more specific example is we had another customer who told us about this. Basically, at the last minute, they changed one of their policies about PTO. And a bunch of people, as soon as they heard about this, their employees were upset. They had already made travel plans. They realized they were going to have to change their plans or not be paid for those days off. So this company got a ton of feedback through the tool from a bunch of different people, not just one person. And then leadership saw this and immediately took action and changed the policy back. So what's incredible about that is there's no one person that had to come forward and kind of sacrifice themselves in a way to make that perspective heard. It's a collective action, but that's what I think is really exciting about that. And it gave the leadership team a sort of insight into what employees were actually thinking and feeling about that decision.
Well, and so Claire, I love hearing that, because not only did it give the leadership team insight, but it also kind of gave them an easy win, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like that PTO policy? Okay, let's just like change. I mean, that's not that difficult. Usually it's just an administrative choice, but that the leadership is scoring, they're putting a deposit in the trust bank account of the workforce when they listen to it, they hear it, and they take action. So I just think that's super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, I like what you said about the bank account and the quick wins, right?
Well, you got to take the wins where you can.
Totally.
I think, as we're talking about this, and like the general concept being, how can we build a culture of trust and a healthier company by, I always think about it as the performance management, cycle. It's like the employee feedback loop, right?
Mhm.
And that's really what this is. And I'll just, refer again to Emtrain's culture report. And folks, this is out on our website too today, so you should download it. But one really interesting stat, and again, I think it's a pretty easy win that you can achieve, is the healthiest companies have 60% people reporting that they feel. Claire, do you want us to? Man, we only have a few minutes left here, but I want to address at least what I see, and I'm sure you're seeing this as well. That we're living in changing social norms. It's not the case anymore where all of us agree that a certain situation is disrespectful or a certain situation is harassment. We've got 4 generations now working side by side, different racial and cultural backgrounds, and so that makes it more complicated. And I think in addition to that, we're no longer in a time where people are just, quiet employees doing whatever the boss wants them to do. They're now talking on social media, on Glassdoor, and what have you. And I just kind of want to hear some of your thoughts on that, Claire, on kind of like, okay, we've created a system, or we're living in a system where I think it's unrealistic to think that employees are not going to talk out when they see something, wrong. It might not be the HR team, but it might be externally.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw that completely explode during the Me Too movement, in particular, like what Susan did with her blog post. Glassdoor is a place where I know a lot of HR leaders are really trying to control that conversation and ensure that Glassdoor reviews are not harming their ability to recruit new employees. Because that's, anecdotally, I've heard that's one of the first places people go when they get to have a job opportunity or decide to apply for a job. But I think all of that is kind of reactive crisis management, right? Responding to a blog post after it's already out. We saw the Google walkout as another example of things reaching kind of a boiling point with employees and employees feeling like we need to do something drastic. So before people feel the need to do something drastic and to do something external, why not give them an internal way to speak up about issues in real time as they're experiencing them, give them a communication channel with leadership so that they can hopefully resolve issues and turn it into an organizational norm that, we want you to speak up, we want you to share feedback, we want to hear from you, and then actually, follow up once you hear back from them. I think those are the small steps that really don't require a ton of energy, time, investment, but that can really make employees feel heard and keep the culture healthy.
Yeah, so I love that, Claire. And as you were talking, it reminded me back in my former days as a litigator, what any litigator will always say, especially in employment litigation, to actually file a claim. I mean, obviously you have, some exceptions to this rule, but for the most part, somebody has to be really, really angry. Like they're just super upset and they're like, forget all this. I don't care anymore. I'm just going to file a claim. And they know that they're in for like hell, basically.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that has some application to what we're talking about here, because like it doesn't take much. I mean, it's just letting somebody feel heard, feel like, okay, I've shared my thoughts, and somebody's acknowledging that they're hearing me, and even better, that they are like acting upon some of the concerns I'm sharing, because I'm trying to be a member of this team and this culture.
Yep.
So I think, to reiterate, the healthiest organizations, and this is demonstrated in Emtrain's, culture report, the healthiest organizations are ones that have built organizational norms and practices that encourage people to speak out and that they feel comfortable speaking out. So this is all good, and it allows the HR stakeholders to go from HR cop to HR hero and actually be strategic and proactively solve little bubbling issues before they become big explosions. So it's all good. Claire, maybe we could just wrap this up here. I think the three main points that are the takeaways from our discussion are: one, we're living in times where there are, rapidly changing social norms. So these issues are more complicated, way more, different perspectives than we had 15, 20 years ago. So there is a need to kind of constantly be managing and having a shared conversation about this. Number two, the healthiest organizations are ones where they've built a culture allowing people to feel comfortable to speak up and share their concerns. And what we've said about that is you need to have some channel where people feel safe to share their concerns, and that's not always going to be straight to the HR team. And then lastly, when we allow people to speak up, please take some easy wins. I mean, you need to acknowledge people's concerns and address those concerns that you can, and continue the constant feedback loop. So it feels like a conversation that you're having with employees, as opposed to just one-way messages, which is, I think, what we've been doing unsuccessfully in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, super. I think, Claire, I want to thank you. This has been a great conversation, and appreciate you joining me this morning.
Thank you. This was a wonderful discussion, and I really appreciate it.
Super. Everyone else, feel free to ping either Claire or myself on the LinkedIn Live discussion thread, and follow Emtrain on LinkedIn, because we do the LinkedIn Live discussions every second and fourth Tuesday of the month. So please join in. Happy to have everyone here. And Claire, thanks again. And everyone, thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.